You're listening to Big World Network.
Just Kill Me, Episode 12, Memories, written and read by Wendy Herman. My first assignment. I couldn't believe it. The last 3 months had gone so fast, it was almost a blur. Almost. Since the day I had apparently, in the words of my 14-year-old son, Levi, owned the firing range, I had been treated like some sort of prodigy. From then on, I had had one-on-one training, mostly with Agent Moss, or Agent Ripley, which is what I had to remember to call him when we were on duty. He seemed to hover even when he wasn't my instructor for the day. It had been intense, like nothing else I'd ever done, except maybe childbirth. That was the only thing I'd done in my life that I could compare it to. It was like being in active labor for nearly 3 months straight, but with an epidural. An epidural turned way down so I could still feel the pain. Every morning began with hand-to-hand combat training with an incredibly intimidating and experienced agent named Hart. He had a deep, raspy voice that sounded like Darth Vader with a sore throat. It was kind of sexy. He didn't intimidate me, but I made him think he did for the first week or so. I could tell it was important to him, so I went with it. He prided himself on coming off as tough and unrefined, and I really liked him. Maybe because he was so different from the people in my previous life. That life where the highlight of my week had been the sometimes heated coupon exchange at Lucy Pevler's house. That seemed so far away now. Trevor had made it clear, however, that he did not like Agent Hart, especially after I came home with my third injury. I assured him I was just fine, and that I was glad they weren't treating me like a baby, or worse, an old woman. I could handle Agent Hart in the training, and I was going to prove it, no matter how many bruises and sprains I got. Hart was amazingly fit and whipped me into shape faster than I was sure Lars even could. Lars. Talia. I'd been standing for a long time. I shifted my weight to my other foot and wondered how they were doing. Their first lunch date had gone well, if a little awkward according to Talia, as most first dates are, and they were seeing each other on a regular basis now. I hadn't had a chance to talk to Talia in a few days, and I realized I missed her. I chuckled softly. It struck me funny that I was thinking of her at a time like this. I stood under a rarely used bridge out in the middle of nowhere, waiting. I was almost a bona fide FBI agent. This was the last box to check. My first real assignment. It was a benign exchange with a longtime FBI informant, so the danger level was next to nothing. The biggest risk, I mused to myself, was probably being hit by a meteorite, as the bridge was the only structure I could see for miles in every direction. Of course, if I had to wait much longer, I was in danger of becoming dehydrated. Okay, maybe just thirsty, but it was a concern. Just then my stomach made a low rumbling sound. Great. My Nutella bagel was long digested, and it was nearly lunchtime. I took a deep, cleansing breath. Relax, Freya. FBI agents don't bitch about being hungry or thirsty. Stay focused. I reached out and grasped the handle of the firearm holstered to my hip. It felt heavy and reassuring, like an old friend. It made me feel confident and strong, even though Rip had made me give him my magazine before we got out of the car, saying it was important to get used to the feel of just the gun on my body first. I knew that was a bunch of crap. He was clearly nervous about giving me a loaded weapon. Rip was standing just 10 feet away, hidden by the supports of the old crumbling bridge, but ready to spring into action and save the damsel in distress, me, if need be, so the weapon strapped to my personage was strictly a self-esteem booster at the moment. I was a little nervous, I admit, but just enough to heighten my senses. I listened to the silence around me, only to realize it was anything but. A dragonfly buzzed by my left ear. A small patch of tall grass that had survived in the shade of the bridge rustled in the breeze. A hawk screeched far above my head, looking for its lunch. Lunch. There was that rumbling in my gut again. Where the hell is this informant? He has no respect for other people's schedules. A voice behind me made my heart skip a beat. "Is that your stomach?" Rip said, clearly amused at my bodily noises. I closed my eyes and willed my pulse to normalize. "Shh," I replied. "I'm trying to commune with nature." He giggled. "Yeah? Well, I think your stomach scared all the nature away. You don't have anything to eat, do you? I asked, seriously considering the grass at my feet as a possible snack. I'm sorry, Agent Douglas. I must have forgotten your treat bag. I thought I was your handler on this assignment, not your nanny. Wait, you're my what? I asked, not liking the sound of the word handler. Handler. It means, he tried to explain, but I didn't need the definition. I watch TV. I know what it means. Can't we just say partner? He didn't respond right away, but I thought I heard him intake a sudden breath. If that makes you feel more important, he finally said. I turned toward where he was concealed, feigning shock and anger. Oh, so being Mr. Big, super secret agent Ty Ripley's partner is such an honor that I can only pretend to be your equal? All I heard was a snort from Rip's hiding place. I smiled and leaned against the bridge, having resisted the urge up until that moment, because I didn't want to get my new kick-ass jacket dirty. I may be the new and improved Freya, but I was still me after all. I crossed my arms and inhaled. It had been a while since I'd been outdoors and just been. I let my breath out slowly. It was a beautiful day. My next question left my mouth before I had given it permission to. So, what does a girl have to do to earn such an honor, Your Majesty? Suddenly he was next to me, leaning against the bridge. I nearly jumped out of my skin. How the hell do you do that? I asked, when my feet were back on solid ground. I was standing in front of him now, delivering my best incredulous face. He just smiled. Years of practice, my dear. Agent Ty Ripley needed to be taught a little lesson, and I was free at the moment. I gave him a little shove right between his pectorals. He cocked his head and raised an eyebrow at me, his eyes playful. He gave me a gentle shove back. I pushed him harder this time on the shoulder. He raised both hands and pushed both my shoulders, and I staggered backward slightly. He grinned mischievously, stood upright, and straightened his sport coat, ready for my retaliation. I made a big production about pushing up my jacket sleeves and ensuring my sunglasses were straight before I made my move. He set his feet shoulder-width apart and motioned for me to come forward. I chuckled and stepped forward, effortlessly pulling my useless firearm from its holster and pointing the barrel directly between his eyes. He froze for a split second, looking shocked that I would do such a thing. Then he relaxed and started laughing. I gave him my "I win" smile, and he put his arms in the air in mock surrender. "Okay, I give," he laughed. Just as I was relaxing my gun arm, he brought the back of his hand around in a blur and knocked the pistol out of my hand. I watched it hit the dirt and slide away from me, coming to a stop about 10 feet from us. Before I could protest, he grabbed my right arm and attempted to spin me around and immobilize me. But thanks to my sparring buddy, Agent Hart, I knew how to thwart that move. I tried to take a step backward, but my foot hit a softball-sized rock buried in the ground. I immediately lost my balance and realized I was going down, and I couldn't stop it. Panicking, I grabbed Rip's free arm and took him with me. I tried to control my fall, but our arms were wrapped around each other's like a pretzel, and the half a second we had until impact was not enough time to untangle them. I hit hard, my tailbone taking the brunt, and then Rip landed full force on top of me. We lay there panting for a few seconds. Rip raised his head off my shoulder, and his eyes found mine. He looked worried. "Are you hurt?" he questioned, his tone anxious. "Yes, jackass," I responded, irritated. I was sure my jacket was ruined after that. I waited for him to move, to get off me, but I looked into his eyes, about to order him to let me up, but his expression caught me off guard. He was staring so intently at me that I had an instant flashback of the first time he had been on top of me like this, well, minus the bruised tailbone. It felt like 100 years ago. My anger subsided, and I found myself unable to resist returning his gaze. He was so wonderful, sexy, trouble, familiar, trouble, sweet, sexy. Did I already say that? He was leaning in for the kill, and my good wife instinct should have stopped him in his tracks. But suddenly, I had been transported to 22 years earlier. Rip and I had been friends our entire freshman year in college, and had finally taken the leap to being an item during the summer before our sophomore year. It was the day before classes were going to start up again, and we had gone to the park for an old-fashioned picnic lunch. One thing led to another, and in no time, we had abandoned the food and were engaged in a pretty awesome make-out session. The fact that the park was practically deserted and that we had purposely searched for a spot that was secluded and not in view of any of the walkways was a plus. We laughed at the possibility of our first time happening in such a public place, but it was a perfect afternoon, and it had all felt so right, him and me. I lay down on the grass next to the trunk of the huge oak we'd camped under, and Rip slowly climbed on top of me. I could feel his hardness through his button-fly jeans, and felt a delicious tingle travel through my entire body in response to it. Although we'd been kissing pretty hot and heavy for about 10 minutes already, something about that first slow-motion contact while peering into each other's souls was otherworldly. I was instantly so aroused. I was annoyed we were still clothed, and it seemed to have the same effect on Rip. He began to work his body into every nook and cranny of mine, shifting and arching until it felt as though there was nothing between us, not even a molecule of air. His lips were so intoxicating, I didn't want them to leave mine until they began to travel down my neck. I wanted to touch every inch of him. I let my hand travel down his back. He turned his hips slightly and I slid my hand between us. As I undid the buttons of his pants one at a time, he lifted my shirt. He began unhooking my bra when a car came barreling down the hill toward us. It screeched to a halt just a few feet away from our horizontal forms, and suddenly we were choking on the cloud of dust kicked up by its tires. I heard 4 car doors slam, and 4 figures came into view. They were all armed. Wait, that didn't happen. Rip and I made love under that tree without interruption. It was one of my favorite memories. I often referred to it when Trevor wanted to be intimate and I wasn't in the mood. It worked every time. I loved having sex with my husband, but in almost 20 years, he had yet to beat that perfect afternoon with Rip under the oak tree. So what the hell was happening? The blood pumping through my veins was so disorienting, I felt dizzy. My vision went fuzzy, then black, and my heart raced. I blinked hard several times, trying desperately to see. I couldn't feel Rip on top of me anymore, but I was sure I was still on the ground, half sitting up now. Where was he? Then a tunnel of light appeared, and after a few seconds I could make out the 4 forms in front of me again. I was relieved at this until someone laughed. I didn't recognize the voice, but it wasn't friendly. My vision was gradually getting crisper, and I located Rip, still on the ground next to me, looking just as stunned as I felt. We were back at the deserted bridge where we were supposed to be waiting for someone. He turned to me and I instantly knew he was confused and scared, which made me even more terrified. If Rip was afraid, then we were in deep shit. The smallest of the 4 men, yes, I confirmed they were all men, holstered the pistol he was carrying and walked toward us. The other 3 kept their weapons trained on Rip and me. Neither one of us moved. "Looks like we interrupted something, boys," the little man joked. He approached me and squatted down, grabbing my chin and forcing me to look at him. He would have been a good-looking guy if it wasn't for that evil glint in his gaze. Rip moved to stand, but the other 3 men simultaneously cocked their pistols and refocused their sights on him. He sat back down in the dirt. Why isn't he pulling his gun? "Hey, darlin'. Looked like your boyfriend was having a little trouble undoing your bra. Maybe I can help," offered the tiny demon. He reached up to touch the front hook of my bra, and I flinched and slapped his hand away. That's when I noticed my blouse was unbuttoned, and my bra was half undone. Horrified, I put myself back together, then looked over at Rip, scrutinizing his appearance. His shirt was unbuttoned as well, and so were his jeans, although there was only 1 button, not 5. My reality started to mix with the memory, and I felt dizzy again. Oh my God, what had we been doing? The small man was laughing at me, standing over me now with his hands on his hips. "Who the hell are you?" Rip asked roughly. I was so relieved he'd finally joined the party. Maybe we had a chance of getting out of this after all. The little leader wasn't as amused with Rip as he seemed to be with me. "Oh, we know you were expecting Leon, your snitch." He sauntered over to Rip and kicked dirt in his face with his steel-toed boot. Rip recoiled and didn't look up at the bully. I was losing confidence in his ability to rescue me, and fast. "Leon isn't going to be your snitch anymore, cop," he continued. Something struck him as funny then, and he said, "He isn't going to be anyone's snitch, is he, boys?" They all laughed on cue. Then he motioned for the other men to get us to our feet as he backed away. The biggest of the four thrust me to a standing position and held me there, while the other two each took an arm and pulled Rip up. The leader walked right back up to Rip, standing on his tiptoes, and still having to crane his neck to make eye contact, and pulled a gun. He casually pointed it at Rip's head. "We're taking your girlfriend," he said, watching Rip's eyes fill with panic. That seemed to satisfy the man's evil desires, and also appeared to give him an idea. "You're going to have to finish what she was doing to you." He gestured down toward Rip's groin. "All by yourself, big guy. But you're probably used to that, aren't you?" He rested his gun hand on Rip's shoulder and put his other hand on my shoulder, pushing us to turn and face each other. "Now, kiss her goodbye," he said, and laughed as he walked back to the car. The goons pushed us together so our faces were inches apart. Rip still seemed very out of it, like he'd been in a coma and was just waking up. He searched my eyes, and I knew he was desperate to find a way to save me. I tried to tell him that I would be okay, that I didn't need him to save me, that I was the goddess Freya with some seriously mad skills, and I would stay alive. But I couldn't even convince myself of any of that. My eyes started to water, and I was powerless to keep a tear from rolling down my cheek. I swallowed hard and whispered the one thing I knew I had to say, just in case I never saw this beautiful man again. "I love you." My words seemed to hurt him, and as the lackeys carried me to the car and shoved me between them in the back seat, I couldn't erase the pain in his eyes from my mind. As the car careened down the dirt road, farther and farther away from Rip, my thoughts turned to my children.
You're listening to Big World Network.